Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you the libertarian angle on the political and economic issues that are taking place right now. I'm joined, as I am every week, by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, who teaches economics at the Citadel. Richard, welcome back.
It's great to be here with you, our viewers, and our listeners.
Yeah, for those of you that are viewing for the first time, I would invite you to come and visit our website at fff.org. We publish articles practically every day. Richard has a weekly article that he writes that we publish practically every Monday. I write a daily blog 5 days a week, and our mission is to present an uncompromising case for the libertarian philosophy. Richard, we recently discussed the debt bomb that exists over the American people, the amount of the federal debt. And since then, President Trump has come out with his tax reduction plan, where he's proposing a reduction in taxes across the board for everybody. There doesn't seem to be any drastic reductions in spending along with this, which it seems to me is saying, to heck with the debt. So what if it keeps getting larger and larger and larger? He's going to just lower taxes and rely on the old big spender syndrome of we'll let growth. We'll grow our way out of the deficit. We'll grow our way out of the debt problem, which is really effectively, it seems to me, saying that if people will just work harder, which the tax cut's supposed to stimulate them to do, that there'll be so much growth in the economy that people will be paying more taxes, and happy days will be here again because the amount of the tax revenues will equal the amount that the government is spending. There won't be any more deficit, and happy days will be here again. This is all, it seems to me, Richard, total snake oil economics. What do you think?
Well, let me sort of approach it in a complementary but slightly perhaps different tack. First of all, is it desirable to see the corporate tax lowered from its current 35% to 15%? Is it desirable that entrepreneurs, enterprises, businessmen, and the stockholders of corporations have the opportunity to keep more of the honest revenues that they have earned by making products that consumers want? Obviously. Is it good and desirable that the ordinary salaried income and related earners in the United States are allowed to keep more of the money they have produced and earned by lowering the personal income tax rates to 3 brackets instead of 7, and to lower the maximums of each, to the extent that individuals are left alone by government to keep more of the money that they have earned and out of the groping hands of bureaucrats and politicians and interest groups? That's all to the better. But as you highlight, what is not touched at all is the spending side. It is the spending side that drives the entire issue of government collecting taxes, government raising or lowering tax rates, the government having to borrow money. Now, back in March, Trump proposed his blueprint for making America great again. And this thin proposal, as it was suggested, basically said that the entitlements are going to be left alone, and we're going to take that approximately 30% of the federal budget that is the discretionary spending, not mandated by legislation for Social Security, Medicare, and so on, and we're going to shift about $25 billion into the defense spending part of that discretionary segment of the budget and out of other segments, such as National Endowment for the Arts and the Humanities, National Public Radio, and so on and so forth, which drove the lefties crazy. But basically leaving the budget untouched. Now, in addition, we have a new agreement as of today, I understand, that the Democrats and the Republicans have come to a compromise concerning the rest of the budget for the United States government for the remainder of the current fiscal year ending on September 30th for the fiscal year 2017. And they've agreed upon $1 trillion of agreed upon spending. And what does this involve? $15 billion more on military spending. From what I've read in the press, the initial accounts, no cuts in all of those touchy-feely things that the liberals like. National Public Radio, National Endowment for the Arts, all that stays the same. And a guarantee under the current Obamacare legislation that the federal government will keep subsidizing these bankrupt insurance policies. So basically nothing is going to even change between now and September 30th, now that they've agreed on the compromise, which no doubt Trump will sign off on. The real issue is looking beyond that. And that is the argument often made, and you touched upon this, Jake, is that since the 1970s, when the emergence of supply-side economics developed, people like Arthur Laffer, Jude Wanniski, and others, was that if we lower marginal tax rates, we will stimulate people to work, save, and invest more. Now, that is a basic sound principle of microeconomics. If you lower the cost or the price of something, all other things held given, don't be surprised if people choose to do more of it, particularly if there's a gain for themselves. But they reached the conclusion that if we could lower marginal tax rates and get people to work, save, and invest more, the economy can grow bigger. And if it can be growing faster, at a faster rate than the welfare state, the interventionist welfare state, the government spending is expanding, then out of a growing pie, as a percentage, the government slice is getting smaller. Not maybe in absolute dollars, but as a percentage of the national income. This is still the thinking of the Republicans in Congress, and clearly even Trump himself. In other words, to hope that you can have enough growth that the interventionist welfare state, the entitlement programs in particular, and the spending that both liberals and Democrats seem to want on more defense, can be financed without the percentage of the government becoming an increasing share of that national pie. Now the problem with this is that just by their own standards, there is no even conservative think tank that has crunched the numbers and suggested that given the trend of entitlement spending, the trend of discretionary spending on things such as defense, certainly more by Republicans, by both Republicans and Democrats, no way will the economy grow enough to even cover the shortfall of spending by cutting taxes. It doesn't mean that some of the shortfall would not be covered by a growing economy in their context, but it won't even cover that. So the debt will continue to grow. The Congressional Budget Office has already estimated on current legislation concerning taxes and spending, it will grow from its current $20 trillion to approximately $30 trillion over the next 10 years. That is by 2027. Now, what does this get at, Jacob? What it gets at is that nobody's willing to grab, as the phrase goes, the bull by the horns. And that is the spending side of government. And that requires asking questions that nobody, certainly not the Democrats and neither the Republicans nor the conservatives, really want to tackle. What are those questions? What is the function and role of government in a free society? Given those roles and functions, and mostly as defined traditionally by the original Constitution, how much would government reasonably expect it to have to collect in taxes and to have as a labor force within the government to facilitate these protections of our life, liberty, and honestly acquired property in the various and sundry ways the Founding Fathers specified in the original Constitution? If that is done, then the only conclusion that is reached is that at least about 90% of what the government does today, let's be generous, only 85% of what the government does today would have to be cut. But that would have to deal with the fact that all of these special interest groups that feed at the trough of the state, from the people who get subsidies for solar power to those who tragically receive large portions of their current income or health care from the government, would now have to face the reality that in the long run it is unsustainable, and it questions the sustainability of a free society, the liberty of the people, the innovative right of people to freely choose how they want to arrange and manage their own lives, and the dynamics of a marketplace for people to manifest their creativity and through the competitive process benefit all in the long run. Until those issues are faced, which no one is willing to face, what is it that is the role of government in a free society devoted to individual liberty? Can this problem be solved? So until then, it is Band-Aids and little patches and smoke and mirrors that just keeps kicking the can down the road, both the financial part of it and the question about how big shall government grow when every growth of government means in some way or shape or form a diminishment in human freedom.
Yeah, it was. I think it was Milton Friedman who said that the real burden of government is measured not by the taxes that they're collecting, but how much the government is spending. And that's really the core of the problem here, is that the government's expenditures are so large that it really is producing a grave threat to the financial well-being, prosperity of the American people. Now, if you, let's say, cut tax, let's say government expenditures are, just hypothetically, for our country, $10 billion, and that they're collecting taxes totaling, let's say, $3 billion. Well, there's $7 billion in debt every year. Now, if you cut the taxes by, let's say, $1 billion, the government's expenditures aren't changing. So that's sucking out that extra $1 billion in terms of borrowing that is adversely affecting the economy as well. And that debt load is being added on to young people, people's children, Trump's children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And there's that sense of moral irresponsibility of saying, oh, well, what do we care? Those are young people that are going to have to grapple with that debt. Now, you've got a point about what Laffer was saying, is that when people are keeping more of their income, they'll work harder, they'll produce more. But at some point you reach a level, Richard, where that just doesn't work anymore. That people figure out what's happening, and you've got the additional burden of higher interest rates because the government's borrowing more, the overhang of this gigantic debt over people's productive activities. Young people figure out, hey, we're going to have to pay for this in the long run. They try to figure out ways to shift the responsibility for doing that from themselves onto others. And so ultimately, as you point out, the problem is that people don't want to face, the problem that people don't want to face is the spending side of this. Now, how long have we heard that if only Republicans controlled both houses of Congress and the presidency, government spending could finally be reduced? And here we are. I mean, they control both houses of Congress. All they have to do is go in there and say, we're going to have a balanced budget. Remember all the talk about a balanced budget amendment and fiscal responsibility? That's all they would have to do at this time. They have the control in both houses and in the presidency. All they'd have to do is just slash federal spending across the board. Instead, they cut this sweet little deal, as you point out, that really effectively leaves all the federal spending intact, increases it, of course, for the military. But I mean, in the larger sense, nothing's really changed, and despite the fact that the Republicans are in charge. Ultimately, as you point out, we have to face the spending side of this. But let's talk about more fundamental issues. It's not that libertarians oppose a tax reduction in principle. What we're saying is that government has no business spending all these monies on really illegitimate functions. The warfare state, the national security state. America has no business being a national security state. A national security state is what China is, North Korea, Cuba. America has no business being a national security state. It was converted into a national security state to fight the Cold War after World War II. But why do we need it now? All it's doing is creating more problems, more crises, invasions, wars of aggression, crises in the Middle East, Afghanistan. And America's got no business being a welfare state. And so what we would argue as libertarians is get the government out of the charity business, out of the healthcare business, out of the education business, out of the warfare business, and restore a constitutionally limited government republic to our land. which necessarily entails an abolition of the income tax that funds these welfare state programs and the warfare state programs. If you don't have a government that is a welfare state or a warfare state and is instead just a limited government republic, you don't need an income tax. And that's precisely why the American people for more than 100 years live without income taxation. And that really, to me, Richard, is the fundamental issue. What is consistent with a free society, a genuinely free society? And to me, the only thing that is consistent is the abolition of this income tax instead of all these gyrations and debates and discussions over, as you put it, band-aid solutions. What deductions should people be permitted to take? Should they be rushing to the post office on April 15th? I say ditch the whole thing, including the IRS and the IRS code, and leave people free to keep everything they earn and decide for themselves what to do with it. Help their parents out, help others out, help their church out. That's really what a free society is all about.
The dilemma we face, because I agree, obviously everything you say, the dilemma we face is that I think it was in online in Politico about a day ago that the issue was why does the Republican leadership in the House have so much trouble rounding up enough votes to do their version of repeal and reform of Obamacare? And the article focused on a variety of congressmen, that is Republican congressmen, among whom were many who voted 11 times during the Obama era when the Republicans controlled the House to repeal Obamacare. But now when they're in the majority and with the assistance of the Senate and with a Republican president, they could actually repeal Obamacare. Many of these Republicans are hesitating to vote for this. Why? Because they're afraid of making irate the population at home, angered at them, and maybe not get them reelected. Now this gets to another issue that we as libertarians have to deal with. Back in around 1946, Leonard Read, the founder of the Foundation for Economic Education, gave an address before the Detroit Economics Club, I believe. And this lecture was called, "I Would Push the Button." And in this talk, he said that if on the podium there was a button that if pushed, all of the interventionist welfare state programs and activities and outreaches that the government does that are inconsistent with the Constitution and a protection of individual liberty would be abolished with the push of that button. Now, he also pointed out that if that button was pushed, within a day or two, all of those programs would be back. And the reason they would be back is because, tragically, it's not just the lack of courage, integrity, and principle among those who have been elected to political office, who nominally use the rhetoric of a limited government, individual freedom society. The fact is, fundamentally, too many of our fellow citizens don't want a free society because they don't trust a free society, they don't understand the principles, the mechanisms and workings of a free society, and they are fearful that if government took away these programs that gives them all these goodies, they would not be able to fend for themselves. The fundamental and deeper issue, Jacob, is that the left has been extremely successful. And by the left, I'm talking about the collectivist critique of a free society in general for 100 years now in America. They have been extremely effective in generating a huge success of indoctrinating, manipulating, driving down an Orwellian memory hole, the history of the epochs of a freer America, so that unfortunately the fundamental job still remains, not just to chastise those in political office who should know better and be willing to stand on principle in their voting decisions, but our task is still at a deeper level, and that is to work at our fellow Americans that they would want a free society and therefore themselves demand that those that they elected to office would vote in that way.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, ultimately, it's a philosophical problem. It's a moral problem of getting people to understand what does it really mean to be free. Are you free when the government is forcing you to care for your parents through Social Security? Are you free when the government's forcing you to be good and caring and compassionate to the poor? Or does freedom legitimately involve making these decisions on your own? Should I help my parents? Should I help the poor? Should I do this? Should I do that with my own money, as compared to being forced to do so? I would add another problem, Richard, and that is that so many people are now on the dole. And when you put people on the dole, it makes it very, very difficult for them to get off the dole. It's much like a heroin addict. That once the guy becomes addicted to heroin, it's extremely difficult to kick the habit, even though logically he understands that it's not good for him. And Franklin Roosevelt knew exactly what he was doing when he enacted Social Security. He knew that if he can get all the seniors, the elderly, on this government program, that he would have them. That the chances that they would then support an abolition of the program after they had been on it for one or two generations was virtually nil. And the same with Medicare and food stamps and all the other welfare programs. And we see it with military welfare. Look at all the cities that are dependent on military installations. I mean, the Pentagon's been ingenious in how they've done this, and President Eisenhower alluded to this in his famous farewell address, where he says the military-industrial complex has all these military projects intentionally spread all across America. And so when you start talking about dismantling these really unnecessary military installations and bases, boy, these cities have a conniption fit. The local press goes crazy. They accuse the local congressman of not being effective to keep their largesse, their military largesse, intact in their communities. I mean, this is a nation of people on the dole. And really what we need is all the young people and the middle-aged people to come together and say, we're going to abolish this dole. I mean, we still have majority rule. And the problem is a lot of these young people have been inculcated with the idea that they should feel guilty about abolishing these programs. And you even have young people saying, oh, if only Social Security's in place when I get old. They've inculcated them with this mindset of can't wait for their opportunity to get on the dole. But that's really the only solution to this is the power of ideas and the quest of people to be free. And that's what libertarianism is all about, that if people gain that understanding of what it truly means to be free, the right to keep your own money, decide for yourself what to do with it, then we can outnumber the people that believe in coerced charity and outnumber the number of people on the dole.
Yeah, a perfect example of the point you were raising about Franklin Roosevelt and Social Security is Obamacare. When it was being rammed through Congress in 2010, 2011, rightly and in a principled way, a lot of Republican conservatives in Congress, as well as obviously others out on our side of the fence more broadly, warned about passing this. That once it was passed and had been in effect for a while, you were going to be creating this vast new constituency of citizen dependents. Oh, my child is guaranteed to be on my health care coverage until 26. Oh, I'll be assured of not having an insurance premium problem because of a precondition. Oh, my premiums will be subsidized if I'm low income, blah, 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 blah. All of these things. And that is exactly, after just a handful of years of this program in an unbelievably mismanaged way, being in operation, has generated this. That very Politico article I referred to earlier is that Republicans now find that their constituents, that is in red districts, like the idea of precondition guarantees, like the idea of their son and daughter guaranteed to be on until the age of 26, like this, that, and the other. So now people have hardly been on this new welfare entitlement fix, as you say, the heroin addict, and already they're hooked. And this becomes a great dilemma, because then the politician running for office has to ask himself, what do I care more about, principle or re-election? And the fact is, the flesh is weak with most of those people, even the conservatives who in themselves may believe a lot of these ideas, and so they are afraid to rock the boat and get their own re-election in doubt.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to ask what comes first, the philosophy of government as a welfare warfare state, which then generates the need for an income tax to fund it, or whether the income tax comes first and then people decide, oh, well, we got to now spend all this money that we're seizing from people. And I recall that great book that influenced both of us by Frank Shotoroff, who was a classical liberal in the 1950s. It wrote that fantastic book called The Income Tax, Root of All Evil, where he showed that an income tax is contrary to the principles of a free society, that when government can seize any portion of your income that it wants, there is no possibility that you can consider yourself free. And it really did subvert the idea of the relationship of the citizen to the government. That prior to the enactment of the income tax, and keep in mind that Americans live without income taxation and a welfare warfare state for more than 100 years. I mean, that's our heritage. That's what Americans considered freedom. When you asked an American whether he's free, he would answer yes, because there was no income tax and there was no welfare warfare state. And that was our heritage. So when you enact, and in a sense, the individual in that society is sovereign, because the government can't do very many bad things to him. But when all of a sudden you delegate the government the power to seize people's income, that relationship is turned upside down. Now the government's in charge. Now, sometimes it's nice, and it sets a percentage at a low percentage. That's where Trump comes in, where he's saying, oh, I'm going to lower your taxes, and all the little serfs are very happy. Oh, thank you for letting us keep more of our money. But it's more of a permission thing. It's like a child on an allowance. When the parent increases the allowance, the child gets really excited and happy. That's where Americans are, and Trump understands that. Oh, thank you for letting me keep some of my money, more of my money. But really, the genuinely free society is when government doesn't have that authority. And that's what our ancestors understood. And that was why Americans live without an income tax for more than 100 years.
Yeah, I think many people, even on our side of the fence, forget the magnitude of the impact of government spending in our society. Our nation's gross domestic product, that is the value of our economic pie that's produced each year, is somewhere around 18, 19 trillion dollars. The federal government, we're not talking about state and local government here, which adds to that, but just the federal government spends, and this is projected now for the current fiscal year, over $4 trillion. They spend approximately 1 out of every $4 of valued goods and services in the United States. That's a lot of government troughs that people are feeding on. Yes, the image of the traditional person on welfare, but corporate welfare, crony capitalism, redistribution for vested interests on the left and on the right. A lot of people receive all or a good portion of their revenues and income from the trough of the government. And to wean them off, both to be willing to give it up and to understand that philosophically, they shouldn't want to be feeding at that trough, is a task that still faces us ahead as advocates of freedom.
Yeah, and there's also the costs of this, especially to the poor. I mean, we're all inculcated with the notion that the welfare state helps the poor, the needy, and the disadvantaged. You hear that from the left all the time. Actually, it's the exact opposite, though. That the welfare state destroys the poor. It keeps them poor. That the more money that government sucks out of people's pockets, the less capital there is, and it's savings go into capital. That's what makes people more productive when they have better tools and better equipment. That increase in productivity causes wage rates, real wage rates, not inflationary wage rates, to start rising. So in other words, when you've got a prospering, dynamic economy that is becoming ever more productive, that's what raises standards of living. That's what gets people out of poverty. That's why tens of thousands, if not millions, of penniless immigrants were flooding American shores in the 19th century, because there was no income tax, because there was no welfare warfare state. And that when you abandon that, you end up with the kind of society we have now, where the savings rate is virtually nil, where people are struggling to make ends meet, where young people cannot even start a family. Many of them are living at home with their parents into their 20s and 30s, and you've got this stagnating kind of society because of the burden of government spending, debt, inflation, and taxation.
Yes, and that will not change until we change the mindset. You see, part of this transformation is the imagery and the language. The fact is, the left has captured all of the empathetic words: caring, progressive, concern for the needy, helping those who are well off, less well off than ourselves, a social good. They have used these words in their collectivist and interventionist and altruistic ways. But as you're pointing out about the poor, or those who came to the United States in the 19th century and early 20th century, is that it is the free society, to use Adam Smith's phrase, as if by an invisible hand, that generates not only the opportunity for individuals to peacefully pursue their own interests, to give life, purpose, and meaning and betterment to their own lives, but through the mechanism of the voluntary associations of the marketplace and its incentives, it generates a mutual betterment of all and gives us a rising standard of quality and quantity of living that was never known in the thousands of earlier centuries that human beings walk the face of this earth.
Yeah, well put. On that note, Richard, we're out of time. We'll have to wrap things up. If y'all would like to learn more about what the principles of liberty are from a libertarian perspective, come and visit our website at fff.org. Richard, enjoyed the conversation. Look forward to talking to you next week.
Until next time.
All right, and we'll see y'all next week.